Okay, let's talk about equivalent parallel resistance. What is that? That is the resistance that, suppose you had a voltage source here, that resistance of this voltage source sees in a circuit when you have two or more resistors in parallel. Suppose you have R1 and R2, and R1 is, say, 12 ohms, and R2 is 12 ohms. When calculating parallel resistance, if both of two parallel resistances are the same, then the equivalent resistance of R1 and R2 is simply going to be half of the value of each resistor. So that would be 6 ohms. So that's the equivalent resistance of this circuit here. What if you had another resistor here? Let's call this R3. Let's say this one's also 12 ohms. Now you've got three resistors that are 12 ohms. When you have three resistors of the same value, then the equivalent parallel resistance is 1/3 of each value. So 1/3 of 12. So now you have R1 in parallel with R2, in parallel with R3. And that equivalent resistance is going to be 1/3 of each value, which is 4 ohms. So 4 ohms would be what this voltage source is seeing in this case. Now what happens if you have different values? Well, if you just have two resistors, let's get rid of this one here. Two resistors, and say this one is 6 ohms. Well, how would you calculate that? Now, with parallel resistance arrangements, the parallel resistance, by the way, is always going to be less than the lowest value resistor. So we know in this case that 6 ohms is the lowest value resistance. The equivalent parallel resistance is going to have to be less than 6 ohms. So the way you can do this is use the product over the sum. So that's going to be R1 times R2 divided by R1 plus R2, which is going to be 12 times 6 divided by 18, which is equal to 72 divided by 18, which is equal to 4 ohms. So that's the equivalent resistance of this circuit, 4 ohms. Now, what if you have three resistors of different values? Suppose you have R3, which is, say, 12 ohms. Now you've got 12, 6, and 12 ohms. How would you calculate this? Well, you could combine R1 and R3, which would be 6 ohms, and you can combine that with the 6 ohms R2, and that would give you 3 ohms. Or, if these are drastically different in value, and you couldn't do that, there's another formula you can use. That is 1 divided by RP, which is your parallel equivalent, is equal to 1 divided by R1 plus 1 divided by R2 plus 1 divided by R3. And if you had more resistors, it would be plus 1 divided by Rn. So in this case, we have 1 divided by Rp is equal to 1 divided by 12 plus 1 divided by 6 plus 1 divided by 12. And so you can combine the 1 divided by 12 together. That's 2 divided by 12, which is 1/6. So you've got 1/6 plus 1/6. And that's equal to 1/3. The reciprocal of 1/3, because this is a reciprocal, is equal to, so you have Rp is equal to 3 ohms. So that would be the equivalent resistance of this circuit. So that's how you would do that if you have 3. So that's a quick video on equivalent parallel resistance. I hope you found this helpful and informative. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel.